Today is a detective story. Kathleen Shimeta shares the story of composer Gena Branscombe and her research and work to bring the music of Gena Branscombe to life. Come spend the next hour with us to hear this fascinating story that started with a search for repertoire and grew into the Gena Branscombe Project. It all started with love. On C'est Sabron, today's guest, Kathleen Shimeta, mezzo soprano. Hello and welcome. And today, we're going to be like a detective story. How do we get people in our lives and then we find a name and then we go like, wow, that's interesting. And then you start looking and you find out more and you find out more and you find out more. And then all of a sudden, here you are involved in a project that is absolutely amazing. And what a great story. And to tell that story today is Kathleen Shimeta, who is with us. Welcome, Kathleen.
Hi, Carolyn. Great being
Hi.
with you.
Hi. So let's
I,
just jump right in. Today we're talking about the Gena Branscombe project. How did
right.
this all get started?
It got started about 20, maybe 21 years ago. I was hired to give a Valentine's Day recital in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. They hired me because I had given them copies of recitals I had done, and they loved the creativity of my programming. So they hire me to do this Valentine's program. And my thought was, oh my gosh, every art song is about love or death. It's very unusual if they're not. And I thought, I've got to find some sort of hook in there that will bring people into an unusual Valentine's story.
Mm-hmm.
One day, riding the subway, I thought, well, what's the greatest love story in music? Well, it came to be Clara Schumann, Robert Schumann, and Brahms. I put together a section of two songs of each of them and directed Brahms songs at Clara. Clara's two songs, one was to Brahms, one was to Schumann, her husband. And of course, Robert's songs were to Clara. I did that only by the poetry, not because that was true of the songs themselves. Well, then my thought went to what's the greatest love story in literature? Well, the Barrett Brownings. And I thought, wow, I wonder if a woman composer said, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. And
Yeah.
thus began my journey. I went to two different composer books, women composer books, found the name of this woman named Gena Branscombe. She had set six of the sonnets from the Portuguese of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's, including How Do I Love Thee? Both books said, this is probably the best setting of this poem that we know of. And I thought, oh my word, I must find this. Of course, we go into finding things.
So this was just like a paragraph in a book somewhere?
Yes.
Was it like Donald J. Grout, that book that we all had to suffer through in undergraduate school?
No, it was two different books written by women that had collected information on women composers. And maybe were
Mm-hmm.
30, 40, 50 women composers in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I searched for who had set the Browning poems. Um, so I found out that Recital Publications out of Texas, I think, had republished Gena Branscombe's four song cycles, including Love and a Life, which was her six settings of the some of the poems of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And sure enough, this setting of How Do I Love Thee was really wonderful. It was simple, um, and she seemed to capture the the seven different I love you this way, I love you that way. She
Mm-hmm.
seemed to capture it very uniquely. I took the song cycle to my pianist, Martin Hennessy, and I said, let's read through these six songs. When we finished reading through them, he said, who is this woman? And you must record these. thus began my journey. Uh, Martin was the impetus and the person who nudged me on to find out who this woman was. He wanted me to record. He said, why not pick two other women composers of the same era? But don't do Amy Beach because Amy's been done. Well, off to the libraries I went. Well, lo and behold, at the New York Public Library
When
was Gena.
Kathleen, let's hang on a second.
Sure,
Well,
sure.
as a matter of fact, we have the recording of this song screen, and we'll give a listen for a couple of minutes to "How Do I Love Thee" by Gena Branscombe.
How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. When feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace, I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as men turn from praise. I love thee with a passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with a breath, smiles and tears of all my life, of all my life. And if God chose, and if God chose, I shall but love thee better after death.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful,
Thank you.
beautifully sung, and beautifully written.
Thank you.
So
I
I
think
could
so too.
see, yeah, and I could see how you could fall in love with these songs. I'm getting like these little like goosebumps here, because we're
Right.
talking about someone that you had even though she was gone, you've had this intimate relationship with her and her family, and discovering her and bringing her back out into the
Right.
public eye.
I
So
did.
yeah, so you said you went to the library. You went to Lincoln Center Library down the road here.
I did. And when I went to the library up to the very quiet room on the third floor, I found that nearly all of her original manuscripts and published works were in boxes in the special collections department. Her family had donated them. The other find was there was a doctoral dissertation written on her that was published in 1980 by Dr. Laureen Elkins Marlowe. From there, I read that entire dissertation. One day, I was looking at some of the music
Mm-hmm.
and I put my hands on an original manuscript and I said, Miss Branscombe, I was talking to the paper, mind you, and her original pencil manuscript. And I said, Miss Branscombe, I've got to find someone from your family. And my hands started to tingle. Well, Martin said, you ought to contact the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Poets
Mm-hmm.
and see if there's anybody still alive. I knew that she had four daughters. I knew she had lived a long life. So
Mm-hmm.
possibly one of the daughters would be alive. And sure enough, ASCAP said to me, yes, there's someone that owns the copyrights. I said, would that person be really old? And there was silence because they can't tell you the name. And she said, yes, the person would be quite old if they're alive. So I thought, okay, that means one of her two oldest daughters must be
Mm-hmm.
alive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
Now
spent,
let's just back up for a
yeah,
second, because I think what people need to understand the value of research.
right,
And so your quest started with just preparing this recital
right.
and just reading through the music, which was probably out of print when you got it.
Well, it had been republished. That
Mm-hmm.
song cycle, Love in a Life, had been republished. So I owned the republished
Yeah,
score.
but it wasn't. My point is that just like, especially with many women composers, and
Right,
it's a journey because both of us having gone through the conservatory system, did we learn about Clara Schumann or Alma Mahler while we were in school? I would say undergrad in particular.
right,
And now these names are starting to come forth in their own right. You know, Pauline Viardot and Nadia Boulanger. We knew her as a theoretical teacher, but not as a
right,
composer. So here you are at the library, actually touching the actual manuscripts. And when we say manuscripts, people, we're talking about the paper, the music paper that this woman has written on, and you're speaking to her,
right.
and
I
the
am
answer
speaking.
came back.
And the answer came back through ASCAP. ASCAP said to me, write a letter, send it to us. We'll mail it on to this person.
Oh.
10 days. Oh, so I did this. And
Mm-hmm.
I explained that I was interested in making a recording. I had been to the library, etc. Would they please contact me because I would like to be in touch and find out more about your family? 10 days later, my phone rang. Kathleen? And I said, yes. This is Gena Tenney Phoenix, and I'm Gena Branscombe's oldest daughter.
Oh my
I
goodness.
am thrilled you are going to record my mother's music. It needs to be done. That led to eventually, within a number of months, my husband and I went down to Virginia, where Gena, well, I'll call her Gena Jr., and her husband Philip lived. We met them. She brought out all kinds of pictures. I asked if there were any specific songs that she would like on the CD. She gave me a few that she would like. In all of this, and backing up a little bit, I also had been fortunate enough to contact Dr. Lorene Elkins Marlowe, who had written the dissertation. And when I explained to her over the phone what I was doing, there was silence. And then she said, I've been waiting for someone to find that collection,
Oh my
and you
goodness.
must have been chosen. Gena Jr. also said the same thing to me. My mother chose you to do this project. From there, it just seems the floodgates opened. Martin and I made a CD. Martin graciously and beautifully recorded four of her piano pieces, and then the rest are her songs.
Mm-hmm.
Then the whole thing sort of catapulted in that I saw a one woman show off Broadway called Sunflower. It was about Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her life, her working in the women's movement. As I sat there, now remember, I was at the very beginning of this. I said to myself, that's what I need to do. That's after I'm done recording, I need to write a one woman show, sing some of Gena's songs, and tell her life story because it's an incredible life story of a
So
woman
this was
composer.
the initiation of the Gena Branscombe project.
Exactly. That was
Uh-huh.
the very beginning. Um,
Well, can we just back up for a second and
oh,
talk a little bit more about her life? Now, you sent me some
yeah,
wonderful photographs. I mean,
yes.
this woman, did she come from substance? I mean, how was she able to become a musician and travel and things?
Well, she was born in Picton, Ontario, Canada. The family had music in their lives. Their household had two pianos. Her mother realized that she had music ability at a young age, and I think she began piano lessons somewhere between the ages of 5, 6, or 7. She was able to play melodies she heard, she was able to improvise
Mm-hmm.
at a young age without any training. She did take piano lessons. She was very adept at piano. Um, she studied with, I think, a cousin or an aunt in Picton. Eventually, she was just this great talent. It was decided that she would go to college. Well, where was she going to go to college? The
Where did
Chicago.
women go to college in those days?
Yes, and there were a number of women composers in those days who did go to college and taught in colleges, which
Really?
is, yes. Um, but Chicago was sort of the leading center of music education at that time. There
Mm-hmm.
was the Chicago Musical College.
Now, just for reference, can you just give us a year so
Yes,
we can kind of peg
she
that?
was 15 years old. She finished high school at the age of 15, so that was in 1896.
Mm-hmm.
She and her mother boarded a train to Chicago. They found a boarding house to live in. Lo and behold, the woman had a piano so Gena could practice. The woman heard Gena. She had a connection to a man who ran the Chicago Musical College. His name was Florence Ziegfeld,
As
the
in the
brother as the brother of Ziegfeld, as in Ziegfeld Follies.
wow.
She arranged the landlord of this rooming house arranged an audition for Gena. She went in with her mother. She sat down and played her pieces, and Ziegfeld offered her to enter college at the Chicago Musical College with a scholarship.
Oh my
Sh-
goodness.
She and her mother stayed in Chicago for a year. I mean, I should say her mother stayed with her for a year. She went on to study with Rudolph Gans, who was a very famous pianist, composer, conductor. He even conducted the New York Philharmonic at one point. She studied with him for many years. She won Best Composition Awards. I sent you the picture of her medal for Best Composition. When she graduated, she became a faculty member there. Of course, as a woman, she made far less money than a lot of other people.
So Kathleen, was she a education major? Was she going as a pianist? Was she going as a composer, or all of those things?
She was a pianist composer major.
Okay.
She studied composition with two men there who encouraged her. Now, the interesting thing in going into music history here, Rudolph Gans, Mr. Borowski, and Mr. von Felix all came from Germany. They were of the German training. They encouraged her to go to Germany to study because that's what you had to do at that time. You
Mm-hmm.
had to have that European background, that foundation of music history. She spent one summer in Germany
Which city?
studying with. Um, she studied with Mr. Gantz, and I'm not sure he was in Berlin at that time. I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember. I'm sorry. But eventually, she comes back to Chicago. She's not getting anywhere per se. She accepts a teaching position at Whitman Conservatory in Walla Walla, Washington, where she's head of the piano department at a young age. She was 25 with
That's
a
a
bachelor's degree.
long way away from home, too.
It sure is. She spent, she taught there for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
In the fall of 1909, along with a friend, she boarded a ship and went to Germany to study for 1 year. And she studied with Engelbert Humperdinck.
Oh my
She also
gosh.
she also studied with Mr. Gantz. Her piano teacher was back in Berlin, and
Mm-hmm.
she studied there. She was there for a year. She studied German. She, at one time, accompanied a very good friend of hers
We have to pause and
for
let people know who Humperdinck was because one of his most famous pieces is,
Hansel and Gretel.
yes, Hansel
Yes,
and Gretel,
yes,
the opera that's often done at Christmas time. All right,
right.
so she stayed there for a whole year. So that
For
means she
almost,
learned to speak German.
she did. She took intensive German training. But one night, one afternoon, she got a message that the American ambassador to Berlin and his wife were having a dinner party for President Theodore Roosevelt and his wife Edith. And would they perform that evening? Belle Forbes and Gena, in a rush, went to that dinner party and afterwards performed for the Roosevelts. And one of the sad things is, and this was a fun part of my one woman show, is she actually wrote to her fiance, and I forgot to mention him. She wrote to him about what a joy it was to perform for them. But Mrs. Roosevelt asked Belle Forbes, the soprano, to please sing something American. And Gena got very excited, thinking Belle would say, well, I just performed some of Gena's songs a week ago at this
Yeah.
club, but she didn't.
Mm.
And Gena was quite disappointed. Uh, but she forgave her and on went life. It was quite a thrill to perform for a past American president
I
at that
think
time.
anyone, even today, to be able to perform at an ambassador's residence, especially if you're overseas, or to
Yes,
perform for a president would be quite a heady experience.
yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I should back up and say while she was in Walla Walla, Washington, teaching at a dinner party on a Christmas Eve, she met her future husband, John Ferguson Tenney, who was from Methuen, Massachusetts. He was a lawyer. He had a college buddy say, come on out to Seattle and be a lawyer out here. He did. They met, they got engaged, which is interesting because she turned to him and said, but I'm going to Berlin in a few months to study.
So a
And
woman
we're
who
going
knew
to,
her
yeah. Yep.
trajectory. Yeah.
And he said, go, I'll be here waiting for you. I will do this. During the year that she was in Europe, he was still in Seattle. The head of some college there said, the wife of the head of a college said to him, you must live in a place where both of you can have a career. And for her to have a career, she should live in New York City, as should you. He agreed with this woman. He, when they got married in the fall of 1910, he said, we're moving to New York City so we can
Mm-hmm.
have both of our careers. That's where they settled. And they lived here from 1910. John died in 1959 and Gena died in 1977. They raised
Mm-hmm.
their daughters here. Um, they had a full life here.
So, how was her life as a composer and a musician in the New York scene? Was I know we're talking about people like Gershwin and People like that were very preeminent during that time. How did she thrive or survive within that environment?
She survived quite well. Um, there were performances of her music in New York at clubs, meaning women's clubs or music
Mm-hmm.
clubs, the McDowell clubs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There were performances of her music here in New York while she was still in Germany. There were articles written about her. I'm not sure if it was Musical America, was very different at that time, but they wrote one-page articles about composers. She was featured in one of those articles. When she arrived here, she was already a known entity because even at the age of 18, she was already published by a publisher in Canada. While she was in Chicago, Arthur Farwell, the American composer, created his own publishing company because he couldn't
Mm-hmm.
find anybody to publish his songs.
Mm-hmm.
He approached her for some of her songs.
So Kathleen, I have this question though. So
Sure.
she's fairly well known. Ziegfeld is one of her supporters from early on. What happened that this woman's music disappeared? I mean, was it because she wasn't part of the atonal, modernistic kind of music that started to emerge because she was a woman? Or, the music is so beautiful. And, I'm sure she was writing orchestral pieces, etc. But what happened that it just kind of faded away? Do you have any ideas to what was going on at that time? Was it political?
Well, a little bit of everything that you said. Uh,
Mm.
a lot of her music was performed by important singers of her era. David Bisham sang her songs on his recital tours. Her music was out there. Yet, I have read her letters to her publisher, Arthur P. Schmidt. Schmidt was known for publishing American composers and particularly American women composers. He
Mm.
published Amy Beach, he published Gena, he published Harriet Ware, Marion Bauer, Mabel Daniels. All these women were published by him. Gena worked selflessly and with drive to get more and more singers to do her songs. She approached John McCormick. She approached Kirsten Flogstadt's accompanist, Edward. No, his name escapes me. Um, she approached all. She would write letters endlessly to get people to sing her songs. Then what happens is that the women of the era, to get their music performed, other than Amy Beach, who had such inroads in Boston with the Boston Symphony and all that,
Mm-hmm.
and she had a great deal of money as well. These women belonged to women's clubs. They were of the era. The National League of American Pen Women, General Federation of Women's Clubs, National Federation of Music Clubs, Society
Mm-hmm.
of American Women Composers. She held national offices and all that. Each of those clubs had music divisions. They had concerts at every meeting. Now, these clubs went across the United States. Amy Beach would go out to these clubs, perform a recital, encourage women from the clubs. Their music was performed at these club meetings. But then what happens is that,
you know so the thing is that if we just back up for a second, you had this network of women's clubs and the women were performing for women. But
correct,
the other thing is, you most of the singers, I have no statistical reference for this, but I think, let's just say 50% of the population is female, so 50% or more of the singers are female.
right.
Why were the women, the famous women of those times, not promoting this music?
I'm not quite sure. Do you mean why the composers weren't, or the women in the
No,
women's clubs?
you well, composers write music, but performers perform it.
Right,
And so if we speak specifically of songs,
right.
we do know that the music business has been male dominated,
Correct.
and was that part of the reason that their music was not getting out within in the general populace, because to be honest with you, I'd never heard of Gena Branscombe.
Right,
I'd heard of Amy Beach,
right.
but as part of it being, I'm of a certain age, so as part of it being the canon of American composers, they were not included. And so the question is, what was going on that these women were excluded from the history books and performances?
Yes, it was a lot to do with the male domination. It was a lot to do with that symphony orchestras didn't believe a woman could write a symphony, except for the Boston Symphony Orchestra, which played Amy Beach's symphonies and piano concerto.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the way these women did it was through these clubs. That was the thing for women in the day. Um, and their music was known. Gena had songs that sold hundreds and hundreds of copies. You can find them on eBay on occasion. I've got quite a collection thanks to eBay and Amazon
Uh-huh.
from back then. They were sold. They were sold to families. We forget that television, radio were, well, radio was around, but television wasn't. Families stood around the piano and sang, or, children learned these songs at their mother's knee.
Yeah, I tell my
That's the
students,
kind.
I said, once upon a time there was no internet, there was no live
Right,
stream, there were
right,
no iPods, there
right.
wasn't even television, and they kind of get wide eyed trying, I guess, to imagine what life was like in that, and so people would use music in the home as a form
That's
of
right.
entertainment. Yeah, yeah.
Right. That's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that these women's clubs had, which was fascinating to me as I delved into this, almost every one of these women's clubs had a chorus. Um,
Really?
yes, if the General Federation of Women's Clubs, almost every chapter had some sort of little chorus. The National Federation of Music Clubs, same thing. They had a chorus. Gena went around eventually in her career. She went around and conducted these choruses at local clubs, and she traveled. She had a husband who supported her and was her, the helping with diapers and meals, and children having breakdowns as children
Mm-hmm.
do.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually her career not only was being a pianist and a composer, but it was being a conductor. That was relatively new to her. She took conducting lessons. She became the conductor of a McDowell Club chorus out in Mountain Lakes, New Jersey, where the family moved for about 2 years. She continued to conduct that chorus during World War II. She was invited to conduct the American Women's Association chorus, which eventually morphed into the Branscombe Choral, which was a 20-year women's chorus here in New York City. But on top of all that, she would give speeches at these women's clubs about American music, about the history of women composers going back to almost ancient times, that there were women, but they were squashed. Um, and she promoted American music, and in particular, I always say American women composers.
Mm-hmm.
In so doing, she spent a year putting together music programs for these clubs to which she belonged that included American music. It included Schubert. It included her friends, Amy Beach, Harriet Ware, Mabel Daniels, Marion Bauer.
Can you talk
And
about this photograph that you found? Because we're going to circle back now to the Gena Branscombe project.
sure,
But at one point you called and you said, "Oh, I can't talk to you this weekend because I'm going down to Washington D.C. to the Library of Congress."
right.
And can you talk about that photograph you found and how that happened, how that came about?
Photograph of the five women. Um,
Yes.
yes, that actually, I didn't find it. A new librarian in the music division of the Library of Congress, Melissa Wertheimer, was new, and she was just doing some research. And in her research, she put a picture of women composers or something along that line, and up came this photograph that had no identifiers to it, had no idea where it was taken, etc. Melissa's research found that these women were in Washington, D.C., because the National League of American Pen Women had decided to open up a music division. Gena, Amy Beach, Phyllis Fergus, Harriet Ware, and I can't think of the fifth woman, were in Washington, D.C. at this convention. They were starting the Women Composers Division. They were going to give a concert. When I was there at the Library of Congress, I was reading Gena's letters to her publisher, Schmidt, and came upon the letter that said, P.S. I forgot to tell you, I've been invited to join the National League of American Pen Women. I am thrilled beyond words. Well, that helped Melissa with her research that indeed those five women, those were the five women. And they were photographed in a park in Washington, D.C. They gave concerts of their music. It was quite an honor to be one of the first women composers in the National League of American Pen Women.
Hmm.
And that was part of my research at the Library of Congress.
So it's like a jigsaw puzzle in a way, or a detective story. Maybe I should call you Kathleen Sherlock Shimeta,
I don't
because it takes time, it takes
know,
patience, a little serendipity.
a
I
lot of
always think
serendipity.
I always think there's a spiritual element, that's
There
involved in
is,
these
there,
kinds of things.
yep,
And in addition to that, persistence. Because
absolutely.
if you had not originally been putting together this love concert, you wouldn't have, looked for women's songs and started
Right.
comparing poetry and whatnot, which led you into this years long journey, which
That's
culminated in the Gena Branscombe project. So I
correct.
want you to talk about your one woman show, and
Okay.
then we're going to talk about the big concert that happened not too long ago
Right.
at one of the
Yes.
colleges up in the New
Yes.
England.
Yes. Um, the one woman show, as I said, came out of seeing this other one woman show. I had no idea how to write a one woman show. I had no idea how to write a script. I just knew these songs needed to be done. Um, I approached a good friend of mine, singer Norm Carlberg, and I said, Norm, I want to do this. What do you think? And he said, I think it's a great idea. He said, you need to find somebody to help you write it. Well, in New York, all artists are connected in some way or another, and not by 6 degrees of separation. Usually, it's one floor above you in your apartment building. One floor above me in my building was a singer, dancer, actor, and now director, Evan Pappas. I approached Evan and I said, Evan, I want to write this script. I don't know how to do it. And he said, I'd be happy to help you. Norm Carlberg agreed to direct it. Evan and I spent a whole summer sitting right where I'm sitting talking to you, writing this script. I actually wrote it, and it was 7,000 pages long, and we had to get it down to
Dramaturge, dramaturge.
exactly. And we got it down. And the first performance was at the Liederkranz Club,
Oh,
where
how
I was
amazing.
so honored that one of Branscombe's grandsons was there. Dr. Marlowe flew up from Texas. It was just an honor to put her life out there. After that first show, we had to cut the script some more. We had to fix some things that needed to be done. Unfortunately, Norm Carlberg died very suddenly. And
Mm.
I called Evan, my upstairs neighbor, and I said, Evan, would you be my director? Oh, I'd love to do that, which was really a thrill. And we changed the show some more. It changed every time we did it. And thank heavens, Martin Hennessy, bless his heart and his creativity and his wonderful personality, he was part of the show on the stage with the piano there. Um, we even made a funny joke about the fact that this pop singer named Engelbert Humperdinck had taken her beloved teacher's name, and how angry she was that that name would be taken by a pop singer. Um, Martin was just game for anything, and he was an intricate part of the show, which was great. He even sang "Please Release Me" while we were doing the show, and it always brought a little bit of a laugh, provided you had people in the audience who knew who the pop singer was. If you were at a college, the kids didn't know.
Yeah, but you toured with this show
We
for.
did.
Uh-huh.
We went to Texas. We went to Georgia. We went to St. Louis. We were out on Long Island. Um, I can't. Did we do it? We did it upstate New York
Mhm.
for a women composers or Women in the Arts Festival, and it was well received. The interesting thing, much like you said, Carolyn, was people would come up afterwards and say, why didn't we know who she was? Look what she did. Look where she was in America. Well, there are downturns in the economy. You're a woman composer, men sold better, um, and life happens
Yeah,
along that
yeah.
line, you know?
And I think women composers have battled against this image of, oh well, the little pat on the head. Leave this to the boys, or the
Right,
this is a man's
correct,
job. And I think
right.
that's changing now. But the other
I
thing I
agree.
want to point out, Kathleen, in your story is this idea of entrepreneurship that you have developed. You developed these artistic projects on your own, I mean, in collaboration with other artists, and you
Right,
took it to another level. You weren't waiting to say, well, I'm going to wait till, City Opera calls, or, I win this competition or whatnot. You went out and did your thing. And I
I
think that's
did.
really important for artists, for the artists that are listening and watching this program. You find where you can create on the ground and do your art. And that's
That's
something I
true.
think that's such a wonderful thing, that this is an example of that. Not only did you resurrect this woman's work, because single-handedly, because it wasn't being performed, there was a dissertation that was sitting on a shelf, and research is always wonderful. We find out so many things. But the other thing about it is that we're able to create something from the things that we discover. So the wonderful thing again is about how you took something that was a discovery, that was of interest, and as an entrepreneur, because entrepreneur doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go out and start a business per se, but entrepreneur means you're taking the reins and control of your career to
Right,
promote and do the things that you find interesting. Now, not
right,
only from the tour and the one woman show, there was yet another development that happened with the music of Gena Branscombe. So, can you speak about
right.
that as well?
Yes. Um, I knew Gena had written an oratorio, a dramatic oratorio. I had seen the piano vocal score as well as the original manuscripts of hers in the New York Public Library. When I met Gena Jr., she had the piano vocal score. I
Hmm.
thought to myself, this is 20 years ago. Someday we're going to get this performed. I didn't know how, I didn't know where, I didn't know why, how it was going to happen. Well, I met a woman up in Hartford, Connecticut, where we did the we call it the Gena show, but it was Life, Love, Song, A Visit with Gena Branscombe. Heather Seaton became very interested in Gena. When she found out she wrote an oratorio, Heather said, I want to do this. I really want to do this. We went to the Library of Congress. I've been there about 3 or 4 times now to look at the original conductor's score. There's only one. And what Heather and I did was we made photographs of every page of the score, photographs of every part of the orchestra. Heather was going to start putting it into finale, which was fine. Well, about 3 weeks or 4 weeks after that, I received an email from a man by the name of Dan Ryan. And he said, I was at a garage sale recently and found the piano vocal score of Pilgrims of Destiny. This is a beautiful piece of music. It needs to be done.
Okay,
I've
okay. I'm
just,
sorry. I'm sorry. I think
yeah,
I just zoned out for a second. So
that's okay.
Dan Ryan is somebody you don't know. You didn't
I
know
have
him.
nope. I only knew him by his email to me.
He called you.
And
He emailed you out of the blue,
out of the blue, complete
knowing
blue.
that you had some kind of ongoing musical relationship
Yes,
with Gena Branscombe, and so he found
correct.
this score at a garage sale, and he says, "Oh,
Yep.
I know somebody who might like this. Let me email her."
Well, he had found it. Then he went online to see if what he could find out about Gena Branscombe. He found my website. He found all the information
But he
that's
didn't
out
know.
there now.
But I'm
Yeah,
sorry, but he didn't know you at all,
no, not at all.
and so somehow this score. Now, people, a score is like a book, and it was
Right.
in a bin at a garage sale, and he happened to go there that day and pick it up.
Yeah. And see,
Okay.
I said to him what was said to me at the very beginning.
Yeah,
You were chosen.
I
Dan,
think
you were
so.
chosen.
I
Oh
think
yeah.
so. Yeah.
my my colleague and dear friend Laureen, who wrote the dissertation, said, "Well, that was like a hook was put in his sternum, and a rope was put on him, and he was just taken into the world of Gena Branscombe." And I said, "Yes." So I said to Dan Ryan, "Well, I have pictures of every page of the original conductor score." There
Mhm.
was a gasp, and he said, well, I've just been named head of choral activities at Clark University in Worcester. He said, I'm going to approach the head of the department about doing this work in a year. I
Now
said,
that's Worcester, Massachusetts, right?
right,
Yeah.
correct.
Hmm.
Well, Dan, Heather Seaton, um, Dan's students at Clark, Will Wickham up in upstate New York, a conductor with whom I'd worked, we all got to work on finale, putting things in. What I did was I did all the vocal parts into finale, and then you cut and paste that into the big score. Well, lo and behold, it was probably one of the highlights of 20 years of working on this. Um, the performance took place at Clark University a year ago this past April, so April of 2019. What was incredible was that it's called Pilgrims of Destiny. Gena wrote it just months after she lost her third daughter to the pandemic of 1919. Her daughter died in that, her 3-year old.
Hmm.
Her husband encouraged her to get to composing. She wrote the libretto for this. She wrote the music. John, her husband, typed the libretto, did research about the pilgrims, and it takes place the last 2 days before land is sighted into, and America was founded then. And it's a dramatic, beautiful work of these pilgrims um, finding their new country and the excitement. Well, Dan Ryan's taught his students this music. It was beautiful. They did a beautiful job. The orchestra parts were being edited right up until probably 2 hours before the concert. The orchestra saw some of their parts for the first time that night. What brought it all together was 20 years of work. At the performance was Gena Branscombe's two grandsons, the great granddaughters of Arthur Schmidt, her publisher, Dr. Marlowe was there. Gena Branscombe's great niece was there. Martin Hennessy was there. Myself, um, friends of mine came in. And if I'm leaving anybody, Heather Seaton came up from Florida. It was a bringing together of 20 years of people who were my clan, who were the people supporting me, um, and the people who were much a part of this project, but they were all in their own little places.
Mm-hmm.
That night, we were all together in one room, and it was overwhelming, um, to see all these people make the trip to be there for this first performance of the 21st century of this work.
Yes.
It was pretty overwhelming. And to hear the joy that these students brought to this very romantic music, um, the joy they brought to it, the honesty they brought to it,
Mm-hmm.
and the conviction. And to do that almost on the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower's landing. It was almost the 400th anniversary. So it was really exciting. And I must add, we're still working on finding a new publisher for the work. And it's a little hard in this pandemic 100 years later to
Yes.
find a
Yes.
publisher because big works can't be done. You can't have that many people in a room, but it's going to be published and it will be performed across America because it is a piece of Americana.
Yeah, and I think this is a really, really exciting story about
Right,
how one person's persistence in believing in themselves and believing in their art and
right,
having the right people around you. Because you can
exactly.
imagine how many women are be, well, you're married now, you should just sit down and be a wife, be my
Right,
wife. And
right.
believe me, I'm not anti-male at all. Not at
I know
all.
you're not.
But we have to understand that women's roles, especially in those times, were so different than they
Exactly.
are now, and but yet they haven't changed that much. Because
Right,
to raise to have four children, to have basically an international career, and having so many responsibilities at an early age,
right.
that's pretty heady stuff. Pretty
It
heady
is
stuff,
pretty
and
heady.
it says something about her strength, about her
Exactly.
intellect, about her determination, and of course, about her talent. Now, I'm going to
Right.
just pause for. So we're recording now, edit that bit. So actually, we'll play maybe about a minute to 2 minutes Pilgrim of Destiny by Gena Branscombe. And here we go. Okay, that was Pilgrims of Destiny, just a slight excerpt. Kathleen, this has been quite a wonderful chat with you and a great, 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 great story. Um, do you have some words of Gena Branscombe you'd like to share at this moment?
I do. I do. Can we back up 1 second? I want to
Go ahead, I'll edit
continue
it.
on a little bit of the
Sure,
Gena
it's okay. Go
Branscombe and
ahead.
then the Pilgrims of Destiny performance led to some other things that are things I had no idea how to do. But this man named Dan Ryan, who was the conductor that
Yeah.
night of Pilgrims of Destiny, has taken it on, uh, and just taken the Gena Branscombe project many steps forward that were a dream of mine. We have now the Gena Branscombe project, not for profit, since the performance of Pilgrims. We have decided that we will put forth her music, whether it's her vocal music, her instrumental, her chamber music, her piano music. We want concerts, which of course now we can't do. But the other thing we want to do in her name and have done, we are giving out scholarships in her name. We give one to an arts administrator, one to a composer, one to a conductor. We were able to gather enough money to fundraise enough money to give out scholarships this past spring, with an honorable mention in conducting as well.
Mm-hmm.
What it was such a high to be able to do that, to be able to bring her name forward in the areas where she shone. She was her own arts administrator. She was a composer, and she was a pianist and all that. And it's just a thrill. And the scholarships will go on into the future. And that's our hope and our way of keeping her alive.
Yeah, I'm going to make sure that I post that information on our closing credits
Yes,
so anyone that's interested can be in touch with your organization and possibly be a sponsor, you know.
right.
These times it's all about there's a word in Swahili harambe, which is basically self-sufficiency. And I think
Right.
it's so important that we all try to hold each other up as best we can as artists,
I think that's
as
great.
musicians, as educators, because you have done this wonderful project that is so worthy of people knowing about. And I'm glad we've been able to have this conversation today. Now, you had a couple of words directly from Gena Branscombe.
Right.
Can we hear those?
Sure. This is a quote, excuse me, a quote from one of her speeches. What I chose to end my one woman show with it, and then sing a song to really end the show. But I felt that this quote summarized who she was. I believe that a beautiful snatch of melody, even if it happens to be a hymn tune, may be a richer gift to the world than a learned symphony. Music is the most potent force making for spiritual liberation. The musician holds a trust so sacred that he cannot give expression to the more sinister emotions without in some measure betraying it. In my younger years, I reveled in gore, like most beginners in art. Then a deep grief came to me, and I learned that I could take no lasting satisfaction in work which failed to carry a reminder of the highest possible conception of the destiny of the human race.
Wow, that's beautiful. So, with those words, we're going to conclude today's talk with Kathleen Shimeta about Gena Branscombe and about Kathleen's life and her work and research, and it's going to continue. These are just parts of a continuous line, and who knows who'll be pulled in next.
This is
So,
true, and there will be a children's book about Gena Branscombe at some point.
wonderful, wonderful. So thank you, Kathleen. Today it's been a
Thank
joy
you.
speaking to you. For those of you watching, there will be credits at the end where you can reach out and support the Gena Branscombe project and the upcoming things that will be developed along the way. But what an interesting story and what a great discussion. So thank you so much. Take care now.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Okay.